This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
本日はここで私どもセガにおけるコンシューマービジネスのマイルストーンとなるプロジェクトを発表申し上げます。このプロジェクトを私はドリームキャストと名付けました。
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the DreamPod by the Dreamcast Junkyard. You're joining us for episode 124, which is a lot of episodes, and we are going to be talking today about something very special because there is an anniversary happening probably right now if you're listening to us on the day that this releases. If you're listening to it later, it's already been and gone, but you can celebrate anyway, right? It's fine. But the reason that we're recording this is for a very special anniversary, which is the Dreamcast's 25th anniversary, the 25th year that it's been around since it launched in Japan. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And joining me, your host, Andrew Dickinson, I have three people ready and raring to talk about the Dreamcast as ever. First up, I'm not sure the last time this person was on the DreamPod. Feels like it's been a while. But welcome to Mark. Maz Gaming, how are you doing?
I'm really good, yeah. How are you, mate?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Pretty good. It feels like it's been a little while since you've been on one of these, right?
It's been a long time, yeah. So I've had a lot of things going on at my end, so lots of work stuff, and then kind of setting up a new kind of thing on Twitch, which is kind of, obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but yeah, it's been a while. It's very, very good to be back.
Awesome. Good. It's good to have you back. And also joining us, fresh off a night on the town, is Brian. How you doing, Brian?
Oh boy, I'm good. Good. I'm hanging in there. I'm going to try to keep up the best I can.
Good. Let's just give us a nudge or something if you feel like you're going to have to go to the bathroom and one of those mornings.
Yeah, if you don't hear from me for a while and I'm just muted, well, I don't know, maybe I'll say some stuff that we can splice in at the end of the episode just throughout.
Fair enough. And last but never least, it is the font of all Dreamcast knowledge, or at least that's how I see him anyway. It is Mike. How you doing, Mike?
Good evening, Andrew. Good evening. I'm doing well.
Good. And you're also quite tired, so I guess I'll just need to be ready with an extra long stick to prod you with, should you nod off.
Yes, you might hear snoring in the background. It's not my chair making a weird noise. It's genuinely me asleep.
Yeah, and apologies everybody if we breathe. So, without further ado, let us move on to the question. It feels like I've not been on here for a while either, so I haven't asked a question for a while. We're having a good old chat about what kind of question I could ask because I didn't know. Brian came up with a good one, and I've put a twist on it. But so. Obviously, it's the Dreamcast anniversary today. We're going to be talking all about our first thoughts about Dreamcast and the Japanese launch and all those kind of good things. But what I want to know is, what was the last game that you played before you bought your Dreamcast? If you can remember that far back. Or do you think it might have been? I feel like I'm going to come to Mike first. I'm going to go back in the order that I went in. I don't know if you can remember what the last game was that you played before you bought your Dreamcast.
The last game I played before I bought my Dreamcast.
Yeah. Do you remember what console that would have been for? Or
it would have been PC.
Right.
I would imagine it probably. We'll look at 1999. I bought it, so that would have probably been. System Shock, was that 99? Not 2000. I mean, it's probably going to be something like Jedi Knight or sort of a PC first-person shooter. I imagine that was what I was playing mostly at the time.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. System Shock 2 did come out in 1999, apparently.
Yeah, so if it came out in 1999, it would have come out before the Dreamcast, which means I would have been playing that because I played it for pretty much the entire year.
Yeah, I think, well, it says North American release was August 11th, 1999. Who knows when it released in the EU, but I'd imagine it'd be similar.
Yeah,
similar time frame. But there you go. Oh, so, I mean, that's a great game. Have you played the remake they did of the original System Shock?
I haven't yet. No, I have. It's on my list on Good Old Games, I think. But I haven't played it yet. No, but yeah, System Shock 2 is a masterpiece, and it's very sad that we never managed to get the actual port on a Dreamcast, other than the couple of levels which were shown and released. Yeah,
well, I mean, there are people doing some pretty incredible things at the moment, like with the stuff that we've been shown of the Metal Gear Solid running on Metal Gear Solid running on the Dreamcast, which is pretty impressive. So who knows what could happen, I guess, in the future.
Well, I mean, if someone can port System Shock 2 in its totality to the Dreamcast, not only will I give them a lot of money, they will be my friend for life.
Okay, thought you were going to say you'd give them a kiss, but whatever works.
I mean, I'm not ruling anything out.
Okay, you heard it here first. Mike's not ruling anything out, so if you can get System Shock 2 in, you're pretty much good for whatever you want. So, Brian, can you remember the last game that you played before you bought your Dreamcast?
Yeah, I can't. I'm just trying to... I can only speculate that it would have been either Smash Brothers, maybe, for the 64, or Beetle Adventure Racing. It's probably one of those two.
Interesting. Which would you have preferred, do you think?
I mean, I have a soft spot for Beetle Adventure Racing that continues today.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah. And that is literally a racing game for the VW Beetle only. Is that right?
Yeah, basically. And then, unless you count the tie-dye version, supercharged version, is a separate vehicle.
Right. Yeah. So it's like F355, but probably not quite as good.
It's different, right? It kind of taps into that era of racing game design where, it was more or less a just open, branching path, just sprawling levels that really encouraged you to race, take different shortcuts and there was like little collectibles and power-ups and just, I don't know, it really encouraged replayability just through the vast multi-tiered design of all of its tracks, which were all very themed. There was like kind of a Greek Isle / Jurassic / volcano level and giant mountains and with sprawling cave systems, and I don't know, it was just very unique for the time, and I feel like more racing games I'd love to see kind of explore that a little bit more.
Nice. I feel like I'm gonna have to go look this up now and check out some gameplay because it sounds kind of interesting. I always like it when people speak really passionately about a game that maybe not that many people have heard of, because I certainly hadn't heard of that game before you mentioned it. So yeah, I might have to go check it out. Mark, what about yourself? I've given you plenty of time to think. Can you remember that far back?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost definitely one specific game. So this is the era of me just playing my PS1 every single day, and despite new games being brought in, I'd play them for a week, put them to one side, and then just go back to Final Fantasy VII. So I can almost guarantee that it was Final Fantasy VII, certainly one of the last games that I played before I got a Dreamcast. Just because I just lost 2 years to that, so it's almost definite. But yeah, great game. But obviously, yeah, overshadowed by a much better console. There you go.
Of course, yeah, of course. And are you excited for Rebirth coming out? Did you play the first remake?
I did, yeah, but I've got an Xbox this generation, so I don't know. It's one of those. It's not going to convince me to buy a PS5, unfortunately, not for the price. So yeah, I'm a little bit gutted about it, but yeah, the remake was good, but I think the original was better.
Fair enough. Yeah. Interesting. I've yet to play the remake. I really need to do that at some point. But
I mean, it's really sexy, in terms of the actual. I mean, it looks brilliant. It plays really, really well. But I don't know. There's something. I'm a sucker for turn-based, turn-based RPGs, and even if you do the settings to make it a turn-based RPG, it actually isn't. It's still action-based, but they kind of shoehorn in a slowdown to make it look turn-based when it isn't really. So yeah, I mean it's genuinely fantastic, but it's just that I'm just a sucker for the old school stuff.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Cool. And then for me, I guess the last game I played, it's between two, I'm not sure, and I was like on the PlayStation all the time, like you, Mark, at the time. And I think because I got my Dreamcast later than launch, I think the last games I may have played were either Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, because I love Resident Evil so much, or it would have been Final Fantasy 8, because I remember that came out not too long before I got the Dreamcast.
Fantastic game.
Very good game. It's had somewhat of a resurgence recently. I know that Ben Starr wore a T-shirt of Final Fantasy VIII when he won his awards at the Golden Joysticks recently, and there was a bit of a debate online about Final Fantasy VIII, and people going, yeah, actually, it was a very good game. It never got its due at the time. People were so in love with Final Fantasy VII, and 8 came out and was so different. That people weren't so sure, but I very much liked it. I liked it a lot. Cool. Okay, so that's that question out of the way, and we can move on to actual Dreamcast things now. Although, of course, Resident Evil 3 did come out on Dreamcast, and the version on the Dreamcast was very, very good. So let's move on to how we all heard about the Dreamcast, because I think that's an important place to start. Obviously, I don't think any of us were in Japan for the launch, and none of us imported consoles, as far as I'm aware. We were all kind of got our consoles from our home countries. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Fair. So I guess let's go through, how we heard about the Dreamcast originally, and then what were we looking forward to when we got it? And Mike, I'll start with you. How did you hear about the Dreamcast originally?
Oh, it's a long time ago. I mean, how did I hear Dreamcast? I suppose it would have been through the internet mainly for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the Saturn at the time, so and I wasn't I'll put this as nicely as possible. I wasn't a complete geek at that point in my life. I did sort of try and start exploring the music world and going out and stuff. So gaming wasn't my be-all, end-all. I was never one to import stuff. I was never that infatuated with gaming. But then I sort of started playing PC gaming in 97, 98, and so I got really heavily into that. And I suppose it would have been through internet forums at the time, would have been through my early dalliances with the internet in that sort of era, would have heard of Dreamcast, and then I basically picked one up with my second payslip at work, my second ever payslip. So my first payslip I bought a PC, and then my second one basically I bought a Dreamcast, and I bought a Dreamcast in, I don't know when exactly, but I imagine it would have been December of 99. So yeah, and again, I said this in the pod a couple of times, but the Dreamcast for me was never, it was never the biggest thing in my life at the time. Mm-hmm. It was a console I had. It was always my second platform. The PC was my main platform. But I suppose Dreamcast got me back into console gaming because I wasn't really into console gaming for a few years. And the reason I bought it is really simple. I think I saw screenshots of Soul Calibur. I saw screenshots of games like Crazy Taxi. Just looked like a completely different system to me. It looked like the first system which really pushed the envelope. So I went from a Mega Drive to PC gaming. So I basically went, sort of 96, I suppose it would have been 97, would have gone straight from Mega Drive to PC gaming. And obviously at the time, the PC scene was so innovative, and there was so many absolute classics coming out. And the Dreamcast to me seemed like the first console which really upped the PC almost. It was almost like they would bring out games that were, Soul Calibur. Even now, I play Soul Calibur every so often now, and it does wow me, the graphics on that, and the graphics on the Sonic Adventure first level. That sort of scene-stealing image is just, I think it was a massive attraction for me on that. Obviously, I was always a Sega fan. I mean, I had a Master System and a Mega Drive early on in my life, so yeah, it was that mixture of something which could compete with the PC, some nostalgia, even at that point in my life for Sega, And then sort of my second pay slip, and wanted to get something really cool. And then yeah, so that's how I heard the Dreamcast would have been online.
It's fair enough, yeah. And I mean, you mentioned there that the PC was kind of your first platform. Did it ever change? Did the Dreamcast switch positions, or is the PC still your kind of primary platform?
Oh no, so I mean, the Dreamcast at the time was my second platform. PC gaming was my main platform until 2004, 2005, and then the Xbox 360 took over, and obviously since then I haven't really been playing modern PC gaming. I've been a lot of retro on PC, but no, the 360 was the console which completely converted me back.
Yeah.
Dreamcast was always a secondary platform to an extent for me. I know I'll probably have to hand in my Dreamcast credentials for saying that, but it always was, until I then picked up Dreamcast in like 2008, 2009, when I started getting into some older games. Then it sort of took over that side of my gaming. So obviously, modern gaming I still play now, and I always have done. But the Dreamcast was then a mix of nostalgia and a mix of just discovering new things. Always felt Dreamcast to me, even now, feels a little bit like a new console, because I missed a fair bit when it came out. I mean, I had a lot of games. I had about 60, 70 games at the time.
Yeah.
I read magazines. I did all that kind of stuff with the Dreamcast. But yeah, it always was a secondary sort of thing for me. But I think also, because it's that stage in my life, I was 17 when the console came out in Japan. I would have been 18 when it came out in Europe. So it was a time in my life where I had other things on my mind, apart from gaming. Yeah. So it's all that weird mix, and it's difficult for me to remember back really what was going on, because I was also going to gigs at the time. So my memory is a little bit hazy about the entire era, I've got to be honest with you.
It's fair. I mean, 17, 18, yeah, I don't blame you for your memory being hazy. Not necessarily because you were young, but I'm sure if you're going to gigs, there was things being consumed, I would imagine. Unless you're straight edge, Mike, I'm not sure.
I wouldn't want to incriminate myself with any comment on that.
Fair. Mike pleads the fifth. Brian, talking about pleading the fifth, that's a very American thing. How about you? How did you hear about the Dreamcast?
It must have been Electronic Gaming Monthly. I distinctly remember being at a Softworks, etc. This is like before GameStop kind of consolidated everything, and then itself just kind of crumbled. But it was, I was just sitting there on the shelf. It was just a green cover with Sonic the Hedgehog in his, what we know is the redesign now, for Sonic Adventure, just sitting across the room as I walked in. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Sega's doing a new Sonic thing, I guess. And I had no idea what the Dreamcast was. I had no idea. So I bought that issue, and I don't know, now it's in tatters after all of the time I spent perusing that, and then, subscribing to whatever magazines I could to get more information about what the Dreamcast was. And so it really was kind of through that lens that I was absorbing everything I could. We didn't have the best internet when I was a kid, so I couldn't really, it was kind of a pain in the ass if I tried to watch any like gameplay videos or stuff. I think we were on our 56K or something even worse. So it was mostly through magazines, and I kind of pored over every issue, built up this hype in my head for what the Dreamcast was. And like Mike, I was fairly detached. I had a Sega Genesis a long time ago, or at that point, and I had kind of probably fallen off of the gaming train, so to speak. I was more I was busy with school and other hobbies and things, and so this really was piquing my interest in a way that I think few things had, as far as getting back into video games as a serious hobby. It was really that EGM that started it all for me.
Yeah, it's magazines. I mean, we've talked about magazines so much on the DreamPod, but they were just like in the day, they were just the source of information, right? It was it's where you went, because there was stuff like GameSpot still around at the time. Because I remember specifically me looking at images from GameSpot, and they would kind of download very slowly on dial-up, and they'd have the little GameSpot logo in the corner, and they would be very low quality. So magazines were the place you could go to, and like you said, buying multiple magazines as well to try and find out more information, and like the other magazines might have different information about the games you're interested in. So that was a really interesting time for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And gaming magazines were interesting just because, I mean, I don't think we thought about them as like marketing tools in the same way as we might be more cynically, view them in hindsight. But they were really giving us exactly the information that game makers and publishers wanted us to have, right? And so every screenshot was a bull shot. I mean, even in that November 98 issue of EGM, it was, a several page spread of just all of the pristine, highest quality shots of Sonic Adventure that really like drew me in and hyped me up for it, even if you're not getting a glimpse of what the downsides of that might be, or the game in motion, or the experience as it actually is. There's no HUD elements, for example, at least not at that point. So yeah, it really led you to kind of draw your imagination to what the aspirational version of that experience could be, rather than what it more realistically was.
Yeah, for sure. And Mark, what about yourself? How did you hear about the Dreamcast?
I think I'm kind of a bit of a tale that kind of illustrates just how badly Sega did with advertising the Saturn previous to the Dreamcast, really. So I had a Mega Drive, loved it, finally got a PS1 back in the day. I didn't even know that the Sega Saturn existed at all. So I really mean that. So at my school, not a single person had one. Not a single person spoke about them. Most people had a PS1. A few people had an N64 eventually, and they were seen as like what existed. And so for me, it went from Mega Drive essentially to Dreamcast. There was one time when I actually came across the Saturn, and it was at my grandparents'. And there was a kid over the road that I used to play football with, and it started raining, and he was like, "Oh, come in, we can play on my console." I was like, "Yeah, no worries." Assuming it was a PS1. Showed me this black box under the TV and was like, "Oh yeah, it's a Sega." I was like, "That's not a Sega." He's like, "No, yeah, it is. It's the new Sega." I say new, would have been a couple of years old. And I was like, "No idea what it is. Looks terrible. Not interested." Left a kind of that was it. So when the Dreamcast came out, I'd literally skipped a generation for Sega. So for me, it was like an even bigger jump, I suppose, because like the last thing that I've been playing is like Sonic 3, and then the first thing I saw was Sonic Adventure. So I was just like, holy shit! Like that is like a legitimately ridiculous jump if if you've never been really kind of seen any of Sega's kind of midway points of that any of their games within the Saturn era. So yeah, I came across it in magazines first, definitely. So I remember seeing it, and it actually wasn't. It didn't have like the actual design in the magazine. I saw it had like a couple of like mock-ups, of what it might look like, and I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And then my cousin was the kind of guy who always got everything day one. So he was like, I don't know, 10 years older than me, lived on the same street as my mum. So every single day one of every console, I would go to his house. He'd have every single launch title, the brand new console. He had like good money at the time, like the launch console, every single launch title, and I just see everything. So I was all over that on launch day. I was like, yeah, around there. So yeah, the first time I ever saw one live was actually day one of the UK release. But I had seen a video somewhere. It may have actually been in game. I think it actually may have been in a video game store that kind of showed the kind of pre-video of Sonic Adventure, the kind of like the kind of teaser trailer of Sonic Adventure, and that blew my mind. So I was just like, yeah, I really need to get one. But the idea, I mean, like, we were really poor growing up, so the idea of me getting one early on was never going to happen. But I managed to kind of wrestle and muscle into my cousin's, kind of cast-offs, whenever he was bored of playing it, I would then jump on and kind of finally get a go. But yeah, so that's it for me.
It's fair enough. I mean, I'm wondering what your cousin did now to be able to buy a console at launch with all of the games. That must have been quite the job.
Well, do you know what? I mean, honestly, for all I know, he could have worked for like MI5 back in the day, because all he ever said was, I work with computers. It's like, that was it. It's just like, don't ask. So I've no idea. I mean, he doesn't really do a lot nowadays, so I'm not sure, what he used to do. But yeah, every single console, bar none, it was every single launch title, all the accessories, like, 3 or 4 controllers, like, like multi-taps or, whatever you needed. He just had everything. So as a kid, he was just like God, you know what I mean? Like, to all of us who lived in that area, it was like, oh my God, like this guy. And, he was probably only 22, 23, but for us he was like, oh my God, this guy is he's like a gaming hero. So it's really cool.
Nice, that's cool. It's nice to have somebody who, because like I mean I'm similar. I wouldn't have been able to afford that kind of stuff brand new, and definitely not all of the games at the same time. So kind of cool to have somebody like that who you can just go and try all the stuff out and not have to worry about it. But
absolutely,
yeah. I think I came across the Dreamcast in magazines and stuff, and I think as my tale is well told by this point, but it was all Resident Evil, so all Resident Evil related, and honestly I had no. Like, I was happy with my PlayStation. I'd never owned a Sega console before. I'd played a Mega Drive at one point. I think similarly to you, Mark, I don't actually think I knew that the Saturn existed, or at least it was not really on my radar very much, because I don't think I knew anybody who owned one. Like, like you say, everybody had a PlayStation or an N64, but the PlayStation was the big thing. In our school, like, if you didn't have a PlayStation, you were nothing. So it was just like, I think it was Games Master. I think I saw in Games Master, like, I must have seen, like, I can't remember now, but I must have seen like some articles and stuff here and there talking about the Dreamcast. But obviously, not being much of a Sega person, I just brushed them off and wasn't that bothered. But it wasn't until then I saw images of kind of Resident Evil Code Veronica, which I think was fairly early on. I remember them. I think they announced Code Veronica fairly early, didn't they? I think even before the Dreamcast launched, I believe.
Yeah, so it was very early.
Was pretty early on, anyway. But as soon as I knew that, I was like, yeah, this is something I need. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to consume as much information about this as I can. But yeah, it was definitely magazines, and Games Master, RIP, was a very good magazine back at the time. It was very, I don't know, in that time period, that's when things started to get like the lads mags, right? So gaming magazines were starting to become a little bit like FHM to a degree, but Games Master kind of kept the geek aspect, and it was still fun and kind of vibrant and a little bit childlike as well. So I think me being the 16-year-old I was at the time, I kind of think I was kind of happy with that. So yeah, I kind of liked Games Master at the time, but magazines and the internet for Mike. You must have had a decent connection at the time to not have to sit and wait for things to download.
I had a terrible connection, but
lots of patience.
Yeah, a lot of tone bands.
There you go. Yeah. So, moving on from when we first heard about the Dreamcast, then there's obviously the reason we're here today is because it is, November the 27th, 1998. So 25 whole years ago, the Dreamcast launched in Japan. And of course, back then you didn't have worldwide console launches where it launched at the same time everywhere. It launched in Japan first, and it was almost a year later that it came out in America, and then followed by the EU. So back then it was bit of a weird time, because we just didn't get to see a Dreamcast in the flesh for basically almost a year since it actually existed. But I guess the thing that we want to talk about next is the situation that Sega found itself in around the time of the launch, because I think that's kind of important historically. As we mentioned, in passing, the Saturn was there. It'd come. They tried to break into the 3D gaming market after having kind of almost invented it themselves with games like Virtua Fighter. But the PlayStation had come in, kind of taken the gauntlet up. And as I say, people at the time, it became almost, gaming became. If when you were talking about gaming, you often just associated it with PlayStation, like people used to with Nintendo. Somebody's mum might go, "Have you got a Nintendo?" And it became that with the PlayStation almost. Can anybody else remember? Obviously how Sega were viewed at the time, and obviously their status at the time. How was that? Just as the Dreamcast was launching in Japan.
I mean, I don't know how much it can be understated. The rock and the hard place that they found themselves in at that point. I mean, as you alluded to, like, there was a huge paradigm shift between, their kind of floundering performance with the Saturn, at least in Western markets. Although it was still fairly successful in Japan, which led to completely, varied visions within Sega as far as what its future should be and what it should focus on. Meanwhile, it was hemorrhaging. It was a company that was hemorrhaging money, so they couldn't do everything, right? And amid all of this, they did see, overall diminished clout among publishers and developers, among retailers who were burned with how the Saturn was handled, at least in the West. And there's just a culmination of internal and external factors, and amid that paradigm shift that had PlayStation be the de facto, trendsetter, of that console generation. Mm-hmm. It was just an uphill battle all around. I don't know if I can just point to one thing to say that's the defining challenge Sega had to address. I think their response with it, when Shoichiro Irimajiri and Sega of Japan were really focused on trying to find ways to fill their own niche and to lead on their own terms, and so internet gaming became a big focus. They wanted to woo devs back to the platform by just getting their system out as early as possible ahead of the PlayStation 2. And so, strategically, they wanted to just get the Japanese Dreamcast out the door, get it into people's hands, and then try to build back a lot of that support over time the best they could. And then, of course, their approach for the Western launches were very different in that I think they learned a lot of lessons from that Japanese launch that defined what their strategy would be as far as what those launch lineups would look like and what the marketing campaign would look like. So we can get into maybe some of that earlier, but yeah, it was just a ton of shit they were dealing with all around at the time.
Yeah. I mean, not least the fact that they, we mentioned Saturn, but they also still had things like the Mega Drive and the CD add-on and the 32X, still manufacturing those and putting those out. They had so many things kind of all at once before this came out, and then trying to convince people that, okay, well, you don't need any of those things now. Now you need the Dreamcast, especially when, the Saturn had been, in the West at least, like you say, had not been great. But I guess in Japan, it was still kind of going at this point, right? In fact, I don't think the Saturn was formally kind of killed off until a good year or two into the Dreamcast lifespan, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and maybe in some sense that kind of eased their sense of pressure as far as trying to build up the Japanese launch to be the best it could, I think, for the Dreamcast. I think they were like, well, we're already sustaining ourselves and that support with the Saturn in the meantime. I think for them it was more crucial that they got it right with the UK and Europe and North American launches to try to win back some of that goodwill. But, in Japan, it was a different story because they did have a little bit of a buffer that they were working with on the Saturn. But that wasn't helping them overall as a company. I mean, they were still not in great shape.
No.
For a long time, Sega's big strength was that they had focuses in different areas. So obviously you've got Sega in Japan, but then you also had Sega of America that kind of understood that market really well, and then you had Sega Europe as well. And I think around the time of the Dreamcast, it was around when it kind of became the opposite of the kind of the positive that it had been for so long, because everyone had their own agendas almost. Obviously, certain areas were like, well, actually, the Mega Drive still sells here, so that's kind of okay. And then, obviously, in Japan, the Saturn was doing great, so it's like, well, actually, there's no real reason for us to move on from this right now. Whereas in America, it was dead, so obviously, they were really keen to get the Dreamcast out quickly. And I think it kind of became essentially a dick swinging exercise between, these three are really two, kind of America and Japan kind of rival needs. And then, obviously, I think as you spoke to Peter Moore and a few others saying, there was a lot of tension internally between what actually the correct thing to do here is. And then, kind of someone had to just step in and say, okay, we cannot have 4 different competing pieces of hardware on the market. There's just not enough space in shops for a start. And also, I cannot imagine what the supply lines were like for all of that as well. So, yeah, I think it was. It does sound like chaos. It does sound like, not even like organised chaos, just actual chaos around this time. So, I cannot imagine what it was like having to go to those, kind of board meetings with, the heads of Sega Japan and Sega Europe there saying, well, well, in our area we need this, and it's like, every single time.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like on some level it's healthy that you have decision makers who are able to strategize in a way to meet the needs of the market that they're heading. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, that resulted in a lot of butting heads between, I mean, I guess like Bernie Stolar, for example, versus SOJ, where Bernie Stolar was like, hey, we need this to be, we need to focus on having the best quality internet connection, at least 56K here. And that was less of a priority in the minds of Sega of Japan. And so, they had to really fight to get that to be a featured component of the console. And so even small things like that ended up just kind of riling up tensions all around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a period where Sega was on the verge of bankruptcy, right? It was, there was people having to actually put money into the company in order to keep it afloat. And so for the Dreamcast itself, there were decisions being made about even what to put in it. Like that, you mentioned the Bernie Stolar thing. It was very important for them to have, a decent modem, but there was talk about not even bundling the modem with it, because it would cost too much. That one of the reasons we probably didn't get 2 analog sticks on the Dreamcast controller is it cost too much to add 2 analog sticks to the controller. The reason we didn't get some kind of hard drive in there is because it cost too much to add that in as well as the modem. So in actual fact, the situation that they found themselves in at this time was important, not just for the launch of the console, but for the console existing at all. It's a miracle that it did. And in fact, I think there were people, I can't remember his name, but there was somebody certainly fighting a corner for saying we should leave the market now. Of course, they got their way a few years later, but as I remember it, there was somebody within Sega already wanting to do that at the tail end of the Saturn. So yeah, they didn't go into the launch of the Dreamcast in a very good place at all. It was a difficult one. But yet the launches were actually not terrible in themselves, and actually kind of showed some promise. And I believe that in Japan, I think it sold out in Japan pretty quickly.
Well, in Japan, it was an interesting situation because they were still spinning up the supply chain in that summer, right, leading into it. And so, they sold out of the allocated stock they had. I can't remember if it was a few 100,000 or a couple 100,000. Anyway, at least around that launch period. But they weren't able to produce enough to hit their targets. So they sold out of the stock they had, but retailers were kind of frustrated because they weren't getting enough Dreamcasts on launch day to be able to satisfy demand. And I think there was just a lot of that was another challenge they were facing that I think Sega was keen to not repeat when it came to the Western launches.
Yeah. Absolutely. Does anybody have any memories of the Japanese launch, of kind of reading about it in magazines or seeing it online?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I was following it pretty closely in those early magazines, but also, any other way I could get my hands on it. I mean, I played, I think, Virtua Fighter 3TB around the time it launched in Japan. For whatever reason, one of my local game stores had just a Japanese Dreamcast that they were demoing. And so that was kind of my first taste of at least how Virtua Fighter would turn out. And I was pretty impressed. I mean, that was certainly a huge step up from what I was used to with the Nintendo 64, which was the main console I had at the time. And, but otherwise, I mean, it was really looking ahead to, what are those games that are, defining the console right now? Obviously, Sonic Adventure was key for that. That was, I think that came out about a month after the November 27th launch. It came out around Christmas. And Sega's goal was to try to get, even though there was a pretty modest release of Japanese games, I mean, you had July, Virtua Fighter, Godzilla Generations, and Pen Pen Triathlon. So that, it wasn't a a lot of there wasn't a lot there on day one, but the goal was to have a number of games trickle out in the weeks ahead. And then another challenge they were facing is that most of those games got delayed into '99. I think Get Bass and Blue Stinger. You mentioned Resident Evil Code Veronica. Those were all originally supposed to come out in that launch window before the end of '98, and they all got pushed. So there was kind of a dearth there, other than Sonic Adventure, and maybe a couple of others. I can't remember if Sega Rally 2 came out, or ended up making that window or not. But yeah, I just remember it. It launched, and it was reasonably popular-ish, but I think Sega felt they left a lot of money on the table with not being able to produce enough. There's a whole story there. I don't know if we need to get into it, but they basically threw NAC, the chip maker for the Power VR2. They basically threw them under the bus because that was where the supply chain hangups were. And then not only that, but there was like something very human about the way Sega handled it. Like in their advertising commercials at the time, they featured Yukawa as like this Mr. Dreamcast, basically, and that's how people in Japan were introduced to the console. And then part of that campaign had him actually apologizing to the public for the shortages. So yeah, it was like a very meta, very human way to kind of integrate that acknowledgement of the challenges they were facing into the marketing campaign itself. So that's kind of what I remember most around that era.
Yeah, it's really interesting for sure. I mean, obviously we didn't really have those commercials over here, so I don't remember seeing them. Obviously, if you went and found them online, you would have seen them like yourself. But I do remember in magazines we would get a little bit of reporting about what was going on in Japan, and you'd get images of executives holding up consoles on the first day, and I think the overriding image for the Japanese launch, at least for me, is the person who bought the very first Dreamcast, who's kind of holding it aloft above his head, looking incredibly happy with himself. I'm trying to remember, so I've been looking around the internet and magazines that I have. I cannot find the guy's name, so if anybody happens to know his name, please do reach out and let us know, because it'd be kind of interesting to talk to that guy if he's still around. It'd be interesting to see find out his thoughts now, being the first ever person to buy a Dreamcast. And in fact, I think, and I may be misremembering this, but I think he didn't even pay for it. I think that they gave him it for being the first person in line for the Dreamcast. So kind of be interesting to hear that story if he is still around. We are 25 years later. Goodness knows what's happened to most people from 25 years ago, of course. But if anybody does know the guy's name, let us know of the Junkyard. I'd be incredibly happy to hear it, because it would be nice to try and track him down. But I think, does anybody else remember seeing that image? I think that was a pretty powerful image at the time of the guy holding the very first Dreamcast.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So that was in a lot of magazines actually over here, wasn't it? It was kind of a really big one, that one, and it kind of went kind of mini viral, I suppose. But yeah, it was really good. And around that era, around that time when it had officially launched, is when people first started really understanding what it was. I think Sonic Adventure was the one that seems to be mentioned everywhere. Like you say, it was the one that was kind of pushing it, and the kind of iconic image of the orca, the kind of killer whale behind Sonic, smashing through all the kind of wooden planks, that's the one that I remember from around that era. It just seems to be all the magazines and kind of all the kind of the kind of gaming related shows on TV.
Yeah. And so, Brian, you mentioned all four of these games not too long ago, but I guess the next thing to touch on is the launch titles. Everywhere else, the Dreamcast had a very meaty launch in terms of games. There were 20, 21, something along those lines, games in Europe, and about 19 in America, I believe. But Japan just got four games. And like you say, they didn't get a huge amount after that either. It was very few games for quite some time for people in Japan. But just to mention them again, the launch titles, so the games that came out on the 27th of November, were Virtua Fighter 3 TB, July, Godzilla Generations, and Pen Trisalon?
Yeah, Triicelon.
Try Isolon. Okay, I always struggle with that one. I don't know why. So I've played through. I think I've played 2 out of those. I've never played Pen to my own shame.
Oh, Andrew.
And I know I don't own it. I've never owned it, and I think maybe I need to fix that. It's that and Super. I have played Super Magnetic Neo. I know they're not the same at all.
Quite a bit different.
But I wanted to play those 2. So Pen and Super Magnetic Neo I really need to get hold of. July obviously was very much Japanese language based, so difficult for people in the West. But I have, of course, I've played Godzilla Generations and loathed it. Yeah. And I've played Virtua Fighter 3 TB, which I rather liked. Does anybody else have opinions on these particular launch games?
So they're not the 4 best games in the world. In fact, I don't like any of the 4. It's a launch lineup, isn't it? Virtua Fighter is I don't think it runs particularly well on Dreamcast. I don't think it's a very fun game. I think obviously at the time, I think the problem with Virtua Fighter is that very, very quickly on the Dreamcast it was overshadowed, wasn't it? So I suppose through hindsight, what looked amazing about the game has been overshadowed by the fact Soul Calibur came out and just looked so incredible. July is it's nearly impossible to really get into if you're not fluent in Japanese. But it's got some good ideas. Godzilla Generations is terrible. Just really poor, clunky. Doesn't feel like a next generation game at all. And then Pen, for as much as I like to mock it, it's probably the best of the bunch for me. It's quite a fun game. Not really a game which would have. It's not gone down in history as the greatest Dreamcast game, but it's a very colourful, very blue sky sort of game. So I suppose in that way it is quite a good Dreamcast Sega title. But yeah, it's not the best lineup. But then again, I think we were spoiled, weren't we, in the fact that our lineup was so good in the West. But the Japanese ones, it's middling, I suppose, the word I'd use.
Yeah. Do you think that's just because it launched? Obviously, I know it launched later here, but I guess. Would we say because it launched early in inverted commas in Japan, because it launched so soon there just wasn't enough things ready, and that's why we got those 4?
I think so. You've got to bear in mind it's 1998 it came out. It's less than 17 months, 16 months than the Mega Drive was still making, especially in the West or in the UK. Mega Drive games were still coming out and it was still quite a big thing. I know Saturn was out as well, but the technology on offer was so amazing. You look back in 98 PC gaming hadn't developed that much by that point. Is that the same year as Half-Life? Or was it year after Half-Life?
Yeah, I think 98 was Half-Life, yeah.
Yeah, it was. So, looking back at it, it's not the best 4 games and stuff, and obviously you can tell that they tried to really get something out for this new platform. No one really... They hadn't had the time to really push the hardware at all at that point. So, I think it's just a pretty basic lineup to get games out so people can actually buy some games with the console.
Yeah, that's fair. Mark, what are your feelings and thoughts on those 4 launch titles?
It's just pretty disappointing, isn't it? You can imagine a lot of kids kind of getting that console, getting it home, really excited for this next gen experience, and then plugging in some of those. It's like but obviously there was a lot of good stuff coming, but I imagine that not the best launch lineup of all time, let's be honest. It's up there with the Jaguar for me, just in terms of like really, really poor kind of poor start, but then got a hell of a lot better a hell of a lot quickly.
Tom will find you, and he will kill you.
Listen, if Tom wants to have a chat about Trevor McFur, on the Atari Jaguar, then he can do. It's absolutely fine. I'm more than willing to have that argument.
Tom will talk about Trevor McFur as well. So.
Oh yeah.
Maybe this will tempt him back to come to the DreamPod episode.
Fingers crossed.
Brian, what about yourself? How do you feel about these launch titles?
I feel like my perception of them has grown more charitable over the years. I haven't really played July too much because, it's a visual novel and, of course, being text heavy, not speaking Japanese, that's a pretty obvious barrier. I would love to see if somebody in the community is interested in, or maybe they're already working on a fan translation of that. I would play it for sure.
Same.
But otherwise, I think Pen I've grown to really like over the last few years, especially multiplayer, because it supports four players. We've had a great time just with the chaos that ensues, and you got 4 people trying to waddle and swim their way through those. Yeah, I think you said Blue Skies aesthetic. Yeah, it's like that plus. I don't know, Candyland Fever Dream, I guess, is a little psychedelicness. And the themed levels are kind of fun. I love the haunted house and the toy castle thing. And there's just a lot of wild ideas it kind of throws at you. And it's a very unconventional racing game. I mean, I think the idea, and maybe it was moved forward with Fall Guys a couple of years ago. I don't know if y'all remember that game. It was pretty popular for a bit. But it's like almost like kind of a proto version of that. And there's just something very charming about it that I will continuously go back to it. And I really enjoy Pen. Virtua Fighter 3 TB is another one I think is, obviously it's kind of a black sheep of this series as far as the community regards it. I enjoyed some of the ideas that it posited. I mean, I sentimentally have an attachment just because it was the first Dreamcast game I ever played. But I loved how the arena design and the varied topography kind of played into how you think about positioning your character, and that is kind of unique to that game, at least relative to other entries in the series. And there's just something about that I thought was really, really fun. Godzilla, I totally agree. It's one of the worst design games I've ever played. I played it a bit yesterday though, and I gotta say I still had a decent time. If you pair it back to just like its core promise of you're a big monster destroying stuff, it checks that box. It does the thing. And I actually loved the destruction mechanics, and when you're swinging your tail into buildings and breathing fire at tanks and stuff. Like there's something there. I think they delivered on, but everything else around it, it's just such a plodding. It's just a very undigestible game as far as most player sensibilities will be concerned, because it manages to turn what is a awesome concept of pure destruction into really a very boring experience. And I feel I actually haven't spent much time with the sequel, but I heard that is a lot better.
Yeah, it is.
Maximum Impact, right? Maximum Impact is the sequel. Yeah, I heard that's better. I mean, I played Godzilla Generations just to write about it in Dreamcast Year 1, and I mean, I had fun for all of about a couple of minutes. I was like, oh, cool, I get to stomp around and smash things and watch things explode and all that kind of stuff. But it was then when it said that I needed to get 100% of everything, and the camera angle kept whipping around and doing weird things, and you could not see what you were meant to be smashing. And you were like, you had 97%. It's like, where's the other 3% of things to smash? I can't see.
Yeah. They're just like trees or something. Yeah, that are obstructed from view with the cinematic camera angles. I mean,
so bad.
I guess the one thing I appreciated though, and they don't it doesn't communicate it, or maybe it does in Japanese, but you don't actually have to get 100%. And once you get up to good enough, you can just leave the area and still clear the mission. So I didn't realize that, and so I think that helped me enjoy it more once I.
Fair. Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's part of my lack of enjoyment, but maybe I'll need to go back to it and see if I enjoy it more knowing that, but I have a feeling probably not. We'll see, I guess. Maybe I'll give it another try. Maybe. But yeah, I definitely agree that if somebody can translate July, I definitely would like to give that a go. Yeah, and I'm glad there are no Godzilla apologists here, apart from Brian kind of enjoying it, but that's okay, I guess.
I enjoy a lot of shitty things, so I just find those kernels of things to appreciate in what otherwise have no redeeming values. And I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of fun it's a fun challenge to make something out of nothing, I suppose.
Yeah, and the poor people in Japan at the time kind of had to do that anyway, because they literally only had these 4 games to play for quite some time. And I do remember hearing stories of people just buying all 4 games because that was literally all that they had. That's all they had to buy. So I can imagine quite a number of people playing Godzilla Generations, and I just don't know how they got through it at the time.
Yeah, Virtua Fighter had the highest attach rate by far. That one legit was fairly popular.
Yeah, and I mean, Virtua Fighter's always been popular in Japan, so that kind of tracks. And it did do some, like you said, it did some fun things, like I think the the levels and stuff, fighting on different levels was quite interesting. But yeah, certainly not the best in the series. But like you say, with age, potentially getting better as it goes. But I mean, thinking about that, then thinking of the fact that they had those shortages of the console over there, and they only had 4 launch games and all of that kind of stuff. I guess we kind of know. Well, obviously, we know what lessons they learned, but what lessons did they learn going into the Western launches?
I think the biggest thing is obviously they knew they had to have a better lineup. I think also because obviously the Saturn didn't set the world on fire in the West. They knew they had to really go out and get a really big top quality lineup for the launches in the West, which I think they did pretty much. I think it's still readily accepted it's probably one of the best launch lineups of any console. I suppose in Japan, the Saturn obviously was more popular. Virtua Fighter is a real sort of institution in Japan, so that managed to sell the console, no doubt. In the West, there was I sort of echo back what was said a little while ago by yourself and Mark. No one really talked about the Saturn in the UK. Saturn's my second favourite console of all time now, and I love the Saturn. I'm talking about the fact that I wasn't embroiled in gaming culture at the time. I didn't import stuff as a sort of a normal gamer at the time. There wasn't much talk about the Saturn. It wasn't on everyone's lips. Everyone was talking about the PlayStation. PlayStation was so utterly synonymous with the mid-90s. It just overwhelmed everything, I think. So Sega was not a dead brand. It's not to say it wasn't a dead brand, but it was a brand which didn't have that attachment of the coolness that the Mega Drive did. So they had to really get the lineup sorted, and I think that was what they put the effort into, and it was very, very successful. I think you have to give Sega, some real credit for the fact that they had such an amazingly strong lineup to convert people. And I spoke to people, because I've shared my story before, that obviously I was into PC gaming, and I still believe it was the golden age of PC gaming. For the Dreamcast to really attract me, and at the time I was on the PC Gamer forums, and a lot of people who were pretty hardcore gamers. There was a sort of that subset of slightly insufferable hardcore gamers, and everyone wanted a Dreamcast. It was a real eye-opener. So for Sega to do that after what is, in retrospect, I know it's very easy to criticise it in retrospect, but it wasn't a massively strong Japanese lineup. So for them to be able to go from that to producing such a stunning lineup for America and for Europe, I think is amazing. Let's not talk about the Australian launch, which still gives Australians a little bit of nightmares now, but everywhere else it was amazing.
Yeah, poor Australians. They have no peripherals, right, for like a good month after launch. That's so right. No VMUs or anything. Like, you couldn't save your game.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. They handled it so badly.
Was it Sega directly handling those logistics, or did they contract out to another production company?
Allsoft, I believe, yeah.
Who they did own, or at least partially own at the time, I believe. Or no, sorry, they partially owned in the era of Mega Drive and Saturn, but then got rid of their ownership of it just as the Dreamcast was coming out.
That's right. Yep.
So yeah, it was an odd time, and yeah, Australians just were not treated very well, and I don't think their online got set up for quite some time as well, and there was just basically apologies for any Australian listeners listening. We've given you PTSD by you kind of having to remember those times. They were pretty rough. So for anything that we went through, or the Japanese went through with their terrible launch lineup, you went through worse. You have our sympathies. I mean, just kind of returning quickly to the Sega Saturn thing, I am just having a look, and in terms of units sold, I mean, it sold roughly 10 to 11 million in its lifetime, as far as people agree, and roughly probably 6 to 7 million of those were in Japan, and about 1.5 to 2 million were in the USA, which then that leaves for the rest of the world roughly 1 to 2 million for the whole of the rest of the world. Which means that the UK probably had very few.
That's about the same as Dreamcast.
Is that true?
I think Dreamcast sold about the same. I mean, I don't know the actual numbers, I haven't got them in hand, but I don't think it's much different.
The Dreamcast sold roughly 10 million, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so even more. So possibly even more. I wouldn't be surprised if someone came out with a figure. And again, I'm sure someone at home is doing that right now. I'll give them my address afterwards. But I'm sure the Dreamcast, it might have sold less than the Saturn in the UK, as far as I'm aware. That doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a bit like people saying that whenever I say about the fact that no one I ever knew had a Nintendo, as in a NES, growing up, NES I should say. Oh, I said NES. I'll get complaints about that as well. No one knew it. Nobody in this country that I knew played or owned an NES. It was not a
Agreed.
thing.
Didn't happen.
Everyone,
You somebody now. I had one.
Yeah. And also, there's always going to be a few people, but I mean, you look now on some like sort of retro channels in the UK, and they sort of say that the NES changed the market and stuff, and everyone in the UK was like, no one cared. No one cared about the NES to a degree of actually being a culturally relevant console. And the same with the Saturn. The Saturn probably did sell quite well at launch. It probably did sell, well within its lifetime for a couple of years. It might have had some games, but as a culturally relevant platform, it had absolutely minimal impact in the UK.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just making more and more people complain about me.
That's fine. We, like you said, we'll give you your address at the end. People can write to you.
It's Lewis Stockcox at.
Just to put it in context, I decided to look this up while you were talking. So we mentioned there that the Saturn sold roughly around between 10-12 million-ish, something like that. It did sell more than the Dreamcast overall. However, where it sold was drastically different. So the Saturn sold, 6-7 million units in Japan alone. But actually the Dreamcast sold less than 3 million units in Japan. Whereas it sold about 5.5 in America, 5.5 million units in America, and closing in on 2 million in Europe. So it was incredibly well received in America and a lot better received than the Saturn was in Europe, but not as well received in Japan, which is, I think, very interesting to note. So yeah, kind of slightly off topic, but just interesting. We were talking about that. I think it makes sense to look at it. All right, so moving on from that, I guess we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but what were our own personal experiences with the launch in our own locations? I can't speak on it much because I didn't come to it until much later, so I don't really have any recollections of the launch over in the UK. I mean, Brian, do you have any recollections of the launch over in the US?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I saved up pretty much that whole summer of '99 because it was launching basically right as the school year started. It was my freshman year, and I remember leaving school as fast as I could on launch day to go and pick up my Dreamcast. And yeah, it was there was a little bit of running around because not every store had all of the things. I mean, I got my console from, I think, Funko Land, but they didn't have any copies of Sonic Adventure left, so I had to go to Toys R Us to get that, and then I needed a VMU, which I forgot to get at the other places, so we ended up getting that on the way home. And yeah, it was just kind of a funny I don't know. I remember it being a pretty fun day, but certainly that was the main game I played for that first couple of months. I didn't really start getting more games until around Christmas time with Soul Calibur and NFL 2K and I think Hydro Thunder and Sega Rally 2. Yeah, some of those. But in the meantime, we rented a lot, so I played pretty much every game that my local Blockbuster and mom and pop video stores would have in stock. So that was a nice way to bide the time, as was the demo discs. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that was also just, I don't know, almost an abundance of choice in a way that, I with my 13 or 14-year-old allowance, I was not going to be able to afford as many games as I actually wanted to play. And there were so many, and I think that is kind of the key lesson that Sega took from their initial launches or Japanese launch into the North American and European ones. It's just like they had to get that right, and it was the first console, as far as I could tell, that made the launch kind of a spectacle, or made a spectacle of the launch. Usually, like in Japan, I think just having a ton of games and all this showpiece software wasn't really as important as just getting the console out in people's hands and then building that user base over time. Whereas I think Sega understood the stakes that it needed to succeed as quickly as possible. So yeah, it built up those very impressive launch lineups for the Western markets that I think helped set the stage rather favorably for people like me who ate it all up, at least in time when we could afford it.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, then in the US, in North America, it sold pretty damn well, and I think the bulk of its sales were in that first year. I think it sold well over 1 million in the launch week, probably closing in on 1.5 even. So a good bulk of those 5.5 million sales in the USA were over its launch, but obviously didn't have very much time after that to sell many more anyway. But yeah, it's interesting because it did so well over there, and I remember that all the big like launch event that they did, and you still see now people post it all the time, the picture of like Melissa Joan Hart playing a Dreamcast, of course well known for being Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and lots of other celebrities who kind of turned up to that massive launch event. It was a really big deal over there. They made it into an event, obviously also being the date they launched it as well, the 9/9/99 being such a huge deal, which we obviously all know quite a lot. But yeah, it's a huge deal over there, and I think equally so over here, because they did similar stuff, right? They had the big launch event at a Virgin Megastore in, I think, was it Leicester Square, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they invited like lots of celebrities, including like, was it boxing legends? Which boxers were they? It was like, was it Eubank and somebody else, Ben or something. So it was a big deal, huge deal. I mean, Mike, do you have any particular recollections of the UK launch?
Yeah, so I was 2 months into my first job, and I worked in a large multi-format retailer, which I still work for in a different department, so I'm not going to mention it, but which means I've been there for 24 years, which is a bit scary. But so yeah, it was 2 months into my job. To be honest with you, from a specific in terms of game shops, I'm sure it was a much bigger deal. But in this general retailer, there wasn't really much hype about it. I don't remember a massive amount. My memory's addled with copious amounts of alcohol since, but we didn't really have a massive amount of hype. It sold relatively well. I always remember two colleagues, one of whom I still work with, who bought them on the launch day and brought them back within a week, and said it wasn't anything like they wanted it to be, which is sort of an abiding memory of mine. I didn't buy mine until a couple of weeks after, so I got paid. So it's a bit of a weird memory of there, but yeah, I mean, it sold well. I've been present for every single console launch since, and it's by far and away the least hype of any console launch I had. But that is from a general retailer point of view. It's a very different sort of market than game shops. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't have a massive amount of pre-hype for the console, so my hype was sort of, as it is now, even with consoles I buy nowadays, I don't really have a massive amount of hype before something comes out. But it was, lots of games. I still remember where we had the games in the store, and where we put them. We didn't have the entire room full of consoles like we did with the Xbox 360 a few years later, which was absolutely crazy. But yeah, we had a lot of stuff, a lot of accessories, which I remember that as well. So we had an entire cage of keyboards come in, which was, I don't know why we had an entire cage of keyboards come in, to be honest with you, but we did.
They were supposed to go to Australia.
Yeah, we had the entire Australian launch in the one shop. I wouldn't be surprised.
I guess, Mark, did you have a good time at your cousin's house on launch day?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean, there was literally about 6 of us there. Obviously, he was there already playing, and then we all kind of ran around after school and was like, "Oh my god, like this is incredible." I remember the big thing that kind of blew my mind was actually the VMU. Because I was like, hang on a minute, like, so that's kind of like a little mini computer outside of the console that you can take around. And then he was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, like there's like a chow on that." And I was like, I don't understand. And he kind of taught me through that as well. Literally mind blowing. You know, obviously people may not remember now, but I mean, the memory cards to the PlayStation and other consoles, it was just a little bit of plastic. You just put it in. You know, there was no functionality. It was just, it was functional in the console, but outside it was nothing. So, I mean, that to me blew my mind. It was just like, not only does this console look better than anything I've ever seen, it's also got all these weird and wonderful things on top of it. I mean, I've said it before, but it kind of felt like the future was there. I've never had that with any other console launch where it felt like such a big jump from what was around previous.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I've been playing Final Fantasy VII on the PS1 that obviously looks okay, but, you know, the graphics aren't great. And then probably playing a lot of Mario Kart on N64, which is choppy. Like, you know, looking back, it's pretty chunky and clunky. And then you go from that to Sonic Adventure and some of the launch titles, and it was, literally mind-blowing. I remember coming away like, I need to beg for one of these at Christmas, and I still didn't get one. It was like 2 years later that I finally got one. But it was unbelievable. Yeah, the VMUs were kind of literally blew my head off that day.
It's I think everybody has a soft spot for the VMU. I think they're just such a little gem of a thing. I am still looking forward to the VM2 when that comes out, just to kind of almost get some of that functionality back, because who these days has the time or the inclination to replace the batteries inside? Like, it's just like, you know, nobody does that. So, looking back then, it's 25 years, quarter of a century since the Dreamcast initially came out. I mean, with hindsight, what are our takeaways about the Dreamcast overall? What are our thoughts? You know, with 25 years of hindsight, how do we feel about the Dreamcast today?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the Japanese launch kind of, for better or worse, illustrated how human that Sega was approaching this, and that they were kind of putting their people forward, both in the, you know, with Yukawa and the ad campaigns, and just all of the ways that they were trying to, you know, elevate or cultivate a personality for the console and the people who made it. And that sustained itself throughout its lifetime and well beyond, where it just felt like a platform that was not created by a committee. We talked a lot about the infighting and all of the different, you know, visions for what it ought to be between Sega of Japan and Sega of Europe and Sega of America. But in that, you also, you know, kind of let those personalities define what the platform, you know, how it's going to connect to people, and Sega throughout throughout the Dreamcast lifespan empowered its developers and studios to really make the games of their dreams, so to speak. And the output there is, we got stuff that would probably never be greenlit by a more fiscally responsible management team if it, you know, at any other company. But you really tied a lot of the personalities of, you know, Yu Suzuki and Tetsuya Mitsuguchi and everybody, you know, around the projects that they were actively putting their foot forward to tell the world that this is what the Dreamcast is. It's these people who are making these wacky and innovative and super creative games that kind of defined that era of, or that renaissance, so to speak. The downside of that is that not all those games sold, or it sold well enough to be able to dig Sega out of the hole it had found itself in before the Dreamcast launched. And I don't know if there's anything they really could have done to change that course of history. And then you alluded earlier, Andrew, that
DVD player.
I still don't think that it still wouldn't have done anything. There's not one thing I think Sega could have done to change it, but other than endear themselves to us 25 years onwards with all of that creative output that defined the console. And I don't think you would have gotten all of that from a company that would have focused those resources on a DVD player, on the, the more practical selling points that would maybe resonate with audiences at the time, because that would probably take away from the just the amount of risk taking and creativity that they were encouraging within the console. And as they were running out of money, you did have like Okawa donate his life fortune, or a good chunk of it, as initially a loan. He wrote it off on his deathbed, but his sole reason for doing that, at least from my recollection, which is hazy, is that he just wanted his people to feel like they were being taken care of, and he didn't want the studios and game makers who were still making their projects. He didn't want them to feel like they were under any pressure to cancel or to have to do anything to compromise what were going to be the games of their dreams, and he wanted them to keep going and lean into that charm, so to speak, all the way to the end.
Yeah, very well said. Mark, what about you? What do you see in hindsight, looking back 25 years later?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we're all biased. There's a reason that we're sat here. We obviously love this stuff, but for me, it's literally one of the most important consoles of all time. I think a lot of people don't realise that you don't get Call of Duty, you don't get all these online games, kind of sitting there chilling with your friends and everything else. If you don't have Phantasy Star Online first, if you don't have a company that's willing and has the balls to put a modem in every system, obviously, even later on, that still wasn't the norm for that generation. Even obviously you could get one for the PS2 eventually. Obviously, Xbox kind of did it better, but Xbox was kind of standing on the shoulders of giants by the time that came along, and was kind of using a lot of Sega's tech anyway. So it's just I know we're, like I say, massively biased. I'm a Sega man through and through, but I think for me, one of, if not the most important console, certainly of that generation, in terms of kind of what we're still seeing today in terms of modern gaming and everything. Like, a lot of it is piggybacking without even knowing at this point, kind of on the kind of technological leap that the Dreamcast took.
Very true, very true. Mike, how about you? How do you feel? Quarter of a century later.
Yeah, it's all right, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's
I mean, obviously, the Dreamcast is something which has changed my life, I suppose. It's everything I do. Everything important in my life seems to be tied in with Dreamcast in some way, which has always been a bit weird. Things, I leave the Dreamcast for a couple of years, and it suddenly comes back, and everyone I meet in future is a Dreamcast fan. But no, I think Dreamcast is the last sort of pure gaming console. I suppose the GameCube probably has a state to that as well to an extent, but it's the last really sort of pure gaming console for me. It's a real bridge between arcade and home. I think it's the last console where the arcade, going into that console, the arcade was king, and after the consoles were able to match it, and it was the first one to do that. It also held it something like Shenmue, sort of the modern day of gaming as well. It also tied into PC gaming and the first person shooters and things like that. It's a real transition console for me. It's looking back, it's got an amazing lineup of games, but also just it's that feel, it's that emotion everyone connects to the Dreamcast, which I don't think any console since has had. There's certainly been better consoles since, if we're going to go down on purely technical terms, but it's at an emotional level. I don't think any console since has had that, people really connecting with it emotionally, and the Dreamcast is a console which people just instinctively want to connect with emotionally. It has that real connection. I suppose it's the age as well. Obviously, a lot of people now who are sort of in their prime, that 40 year bracket because we're all getting quite old. Because we're all in that age, I suppose we are in that sort of perfect nostalgia moment for the Dreamcast anyway. But it's just the personality and it's the joy, I suppose, of the console, and that's what I take away from 25 years.
Yeah. Again, well said. I think, we've discussed a lot about the failings that happened that got, that brought Sega up to releasing the Dreamcast, and obviously then, of course, then got them to discontinue it and kind of leave the hardware market completely. And, we see those as failings, and we can look at things like the PlayStation coming in and, even the threat of the PlayStation 2 kind of obviously took away a lot of the sales because people were waiting for that and how great that was going to be. And, there's all these things that we could say that led to the downfall of the Dreamcast, and that it was probably doomed to fail from the start. But actually, as Brian said, if that hadn't been the case, if it hadn't failed, if it hadn't been in the situation it was, then the Dreamcast that we know today would not be what it was. We wouldn't have gotten all of these amazing creative games. We probably wouldn't have got a console that was online out of the box. We probably wouldn't have gotten the VMU or anything like that. We would have gotten something very focused on, wanting to sell as many things as possible to compete with the PlayStation as much as it could. And then, we probably would have got a DVD player, Mark, if that's if that's how they've gone with it. So, but I think we should probably all be glad that's not what happened, because we just wouldn't be in this situation that we're in now with the console that we obviously all adore. And everybody who's listening to this, if you don't adore the Dreamcast, why are you listening to DreamPod episode 124? You should absolutely be in love with this thing. Although
we welcome people who are just have a cursory interest, who may be curious. We'd love to share that.
Oh, of course, yeah. But, if you have a cursory interest, you obviously find something interesting about the Dreamcast, right? To have even come and listened to what we're talking about.
Maybe they lost a bet or something.
Yeah. it's too fair.
If you've lost a bet and you've had to listen to the DreamPod, I'm really sorry. There are worse things that you could have been asked to do, I guess. There's take solace in that. I think, the point is really that it is the console it is, and it has the love that it has because of all of the things that happened. And it's just like your own life, I guess. All of the shit that you go through just kind of makes you who you are, and it's exactly the same for the Dreamcast. So
it's perfect because it's imperfect.
Exactly. And we should all be grateful for that. We should all celebrate. We should all celebrate those imperfections, and we should almost be thanking people like Sony for coming in and doing what they did. We should almost be thanking the higher ups at Sega for getting them into such terrible financial difficulty that they had to be in that situation, because that's how we got the Dreamcast in the way that we got it. So yeah. Thank you everybody for making the Dreamcast fail. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Happy anniversary. So there you go. It's 25 years on, it is still a console that people are talking about. I mean, it's not just us. There are multiple people all around the internet, and even not on the internet, who still play the Dreamcast, talk about the Dreamcast, make new games for the Dreamcast. It's alive. It is still living. It's still thinking, even all these years later. So, wrapping up then, I guess we've got a lot to take away from this episode, a lot to be grateful for, a lot to think about, and really, let's all just go and play a Dreamcast now. Let's go play some games to celebrate it being, having been in the world for 25 years, and also just as a little bit of a, I guess it's a I guess it's a birthday present from the Dreamcast Junkyard. So we're gifting the Dreamcast this year with the top 200, the 2023 top 200. We're not just gifting the Dreamcast, we're gifting the Dreamcast community with the top 200, which was voted for by the community. So thank you very much, Dreamcast community. We finally have that. We've been alluding to it for some time. But it should be out. All being well, it should be out now that you're listening to this podcast. And it has been a labour of love. I think did we start this in 2022? I feel like we started this in 2022.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So it's been some time, and it's now near the end of 2023. But to be honest, what's a more fitting time to release this kind of list than on the 25th anniversary of the console?
All planned.
Yeah, we meant it all along. This is what we meant. Yeah. Absolutely.
Seamless. Absolutely seamless.
Absolutely. And in the time that we've been doing this, we have also got a few guests in to write a few bits of a few blurbs for games with some of their opinions and their thoughts on some of the games in that top 200. So we've got people from the Junkyard like ourselves who've written things about games. But we've also had people like Video Game Esoterica, Pat from Sega Saturn Shiro, Retro Faith, James and Matt from Shenmue Dojo, and many more. I think Kev has actually written the most. Kev has been like instrumental in those pieces of text. So big shout out to Kev for that. Thank you very much. Also a huge shout out to Lewis because he has spent a lot of his time putting that together. And I think we've all done a little bit here and there. I think I've written some stuff and helped put things together. Mike, you have as well. Brian, you have.
I've done nothing. I'm taking no credit for this at all.
You already wrote the entire book of A to Z.
You did.
So I feel like you've done your time.
Well, I did the 2016 one, and I did it all, and I had to do every single bit of writing. I did it in 2 months, and it killed me. And I vowed I would never do another poll again, apart from the fact that I've got an announcement in a minute. But yeah.
I think the fact that this took us almost a year to put together, the fact that you did that in 2 months. Yeah, I'm not sure how you're still with us, to be honest, Mike. That's some feat. There you go. Yeah, so do go check that out. I think one of the big things of this one is that there are many more indie games in this particular poll because obviously many had come out since 2016. So there's quite a few, which is kind of very nice to see. I think there's a lot of shift as well. I think a lot of games have shifted position from 2016, as far as I'm aware. Apart from a few core ones, there'll be some surprises. There'll be some not so surprises, but go and have a look. Please do check it out. And we did at some point in 2022 do a top 25 staff list as well. So check that out too, if you so wish. It's just a good place to start in terms of, if you are new, as we spoke about earlier, if you are new to the Dreamcast and you really don't know where to start, then probably lists like that will help you figure out the best of the games to play. And so you can get them onto your GDMU or go trawling eBay for the best prices for things like Shenmue and Project Justice, which you probably won't find a very good price for, especially if you want the PAL version. But yeah, so that's that. Go check it out. And I guess all that is left to do really is go around and give out our details. Mike, shall we start with you? What's your address?
So before I do that, so I have a slightly extra announcement as well. So on the back of this, it's obviously now that the top 200 is out. On the very bottom of it, you'll notice that we are going to be doing a top 25 indie poll as well. Literally within the next few days from the date of this podcast. So that'll be on some social media bits as well. And there also is a article appearing on the website, which will be a complete guide to indie games, which I've been working on currently. Sort of a side project from the guide. So that's my sort of anniversary present to the Dreamcast as well. My address online, I'm on X, Twitter, whatever he's calling it, at Dreamcast Pics. I don't use it often at the current time. I'm also at space_turnip on that same hell site.
Lovely. And I feel like we just ask you this every time now, but how's the A to Z going, Mike?
So the A to Z's done. It's been done for the last month and a half. I've got a physical copy in front of me now. Will I be printing it this year? No. Will I do it next year? Probably. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work to do, so I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to have time to do it. But it's all done. So the PDF version will be out very, very soon anyway.
Lovely. You heard it here first. It might be printed in 2024. Yeah. Look forward to it. Cool. Brian, where can people find your good self?
Nowhere. I don't know. I'm busy with a lot of shit lately. Not spending too much time online, but I think I'm on the Twitter hellscape as well. I'm at Virtua Schlub. I think either that's my handle or my name is Jet Brian Radio. I'm also on Blue Sky under Jet Brian Radio, and I have a blog that I update very infrequently, maybe a few articles a year, and that is just about random video game musings called thevirtuaplanet.com.
Lovely. And Mark, where can we find you?
Yep. So things have changed actually since since I was last on a DreamPod. Although the YouTube does still exist, I wouldn't particularly push you that way at the moment. So I am largely on Twitch now. So I host what's called Maz Mondays, which every Monday we host an interactive quiz. So stream starts at 7:30, the quiz starts at 8, and it's 3 different rounds every week. There's like a Wheel of Fortune style like physical board that we spin. It makes a really nice sound. In fact, let me just spin it now so you guys can. Ooh, really nice, like quiz show sound. Yes. So there's like 3 prizes every week. The community's been growing every single week, so we're now up to it's kind of big numbers now. It's getting really cool. But yeah, definitely give us a follow on Twitch. That is Maz Gaming UK, MAZ Gaming UK, over on Twitch, and I'm also in the Twitter hellscape under the same thing as well. So Maz Gaming UK, MAZ Gaming UK.
Awesome. Yeah, go and follow Mark on Twitch and on Twitter if you enjoy the hellscape. You can also find me at the hellscape at Oddment84. I'm on a few other things, but I can't remember what my handle is. Probably Oddment84 on those as well, but I'm on Blue Sky and Mastodon and a few other things. I'm not very active on any of those things, but I have alerts set up, so if you do happen to message me, I will see it. But I'm mostly on Twitter still, and I will continue to refuse to call it X.
You just did.
I did. Well, I didn't call it X. I just said I would refuse to call it X. I am calling it Twitter. That is how I'm referring to
Duly
it.
noted. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you for noting that. So, yes, in terms of the Dreamcast Junkyard, you can find everything Dreamcast Junkyard related on X. No, wait. I said I wasn't going to call it X.
Oh, yeah.
I broke my own rule.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah. Okay. You can find everything Dreamcast related. Dreamcast Junkyard related, in fact, over on Twitter at the DC Junkyard. You can find the blog, which you should go check out because we're uploading new blog articles semi-frequently, and that is the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. We have the YouTube channel as well, which I believe is is it just the DC Junkyard again?
Yeah.
So go check that out, and of course our Facebook group, which is it's all right. Go check them out. It's good.
It's massive now over there. It's huge. It's really good.
I mean, I wouldn't go personally.
Well, again, something for Lewis to cut. Thank you, Lewis, for cutting this bit. Let's just not mention it. Yes, so please do go check out everything that we do. Join us again for another DreamPod, of course. If you're one of the people who have yet to buy a copy of Dreamcast Year 1 or Dreamcast Year 2, I don't think there's many of you left now. You can still buy. I have very few copies left physically, and those can be bought if you go to bit.ly/DCY physical, and you can buy it digitally as well, which is the same again, but DCY digital, because I don't have much imagination in terms of naming sites. So that's that. But yes, please do follow everything that the Dreamcast Junkyard do. Of course, the Dreamcast Junkyard were involved quite heavily in year 2. So thank you. In fact, everybody on this podcast wrote something for that book. And yeah, we will be doing a year 3 at some point. But back to the Dreamcast Junkyard. Yes, please do go check that out. You can still buy as a coffee, I think, which is buymeacoffee.com/DC Junkyard. But I believe we will have something new coming up in the near future that we're not ready to talk about yet. So yes, and don't feel like you need to give us anything. It's just if you fancy it. If you fancy buying us a VMU battery, you certainly can, but you don't have to. It just helps us keep the lights on, that's all. Thank you so much for listening today, and go and play a Dreamcast right now if you can. If not, go and buy one. Go and watch some Let's Play videos, some videos online. Give the Dreamcast some love however you can. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.
This is the Dreamcast disc. 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 And is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.
And if I can just add,
No.
whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever you are, give Pen a chance. Those are my parting thoughts.
Please feel free to cut this out, Lewis, if it's not of any significance. I don't think we need to really discuss this, but
I don't think he listens to it. I think Lewis just like puts it all together and randomly edits stuff. Yeah, I don't think he listens to it. He wouldn't listen to this.
Yeah. Oh well, let's. Lewis, if you are listening to this, cut yourself in saying the Dreamcast sucks.
Yeah,
the Dreamcast sucks.
Before I go off into some kind of weird rant that Lewis definitely has to cunt. Oh my god, he definitely has to cut that. Fuck's sake, what is wrong with
leave that on. Leave that on, Lewis. If you're listening to this, Lewis, leave that on, right? I want that as the outro to this podcast. Just Andrew saying that. Cut it a bit before, just a word. Just the word
cunt. Okay.
Yeah, do it.
It's the imperfections that make it perfect.
Exactly. It's a perfect Dreamcast metaphor.